Hello, and welcome to the very, very first episode of what will be a whole series of conversations I'll be having with different thought leaders and experts. Today, I was chatting with Danielle Dobson, who is an amazing lady. She's an executive coach, focuses on leadership development, and runs an organization called DNA, Simplifying the Leadership Code, which is very cool. She's got a new book coming out, and her book's around gender issues in the workplace. Recently, she'd posted a comment about an episode of Q&A on Australian TV here that was largely a panel of feminists with very strong views on feminism and toxic masculinity and things like this. The You can make up your own mind about the show. I thought it was interesting. What she found, though, was when she asked for commentary on social media, she got a really interestingly powerful backlash from people, vilifying both the episode and her for even talking about it. So, look, the conversation we get into talks about gender in the workplace. It talks about trolling online. We talk a little bit about some of the ways in which we're able to talk to each other and give feedback. It's an interesting conversation that diverts to things like hate speech, gender issues, pay gaps, meritocracies, hierarchies. We cover quite a bit of ground. If you really enjoy it, I'd love you to check out more of these episodes. There'll be more coming, and leave any commentary and feedback below. Thanks very much, and enjoy Danielle Dobson. Welcome. Tell me, there was an interesting conversation that's been going on your LinkedIn feed in the last few days. Can you just tell me a bit about what it is and what's going on?
Okay, so my objective is to do 1 or 2 posts a week, and my book is about deciphering the gender code. So I like to keep sort of fairly focused around posts that are relating to that and the bigger picture, and role modeling what contributes to where we're at. But really, my intention is to spark conversation, not spout a best practice, basically. So with that, I saw the Q&A program on Monday night. It was an all-female feminist panel, and I'm in a group of people who were going to be in the audience. We're in a pod on LinkedIn, and one guy in particular, and Jess Hill, she's in the pod as well, or the speaking group. And so yeah, I was really interested to watch it. And there were some really great points that a couple of the panelists brought across. So Jess Hill and another panelist. And yes, there was a lot that went on in the rest of the program that could be considered inflammatory for some people. But what I took from it was the hopeful aspects of being human together. And to illustrate that, I put the question out: what is positive masculinity if we're working towards, gender equality and acceptance and working together, collaboration, and understanding the context that we're in terms of the gender code and societal norms. And so yeah, that was my take on it. And then what happened was it kind of took off, and it kind of exploded. And what was interesting to note is that some people who I didn't even know came from nowhere. I'm not connected to them. I'm not sure where they come from. And I'm still curious to know how they saw my post, if it was my hashtag feminism hashtag, or my masculinity hashtag, or something completely else. I'm really not sure. And yeah, so there was some people who decided that didn't sit well with them, and then the whole program didn't sit well. So they used my post as a vehicle to express their anger, frustration about the whole entire program and people in it and what they were saying. And then it snowballed. So I guess I kept coming back to that wasn't what my post was about. It was about a positive, hopeful aspect, and I did reference the whole entire program and the other people on the panel and what they were saying.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think part of my take on it was you asked a question, and quickly it became apparent that people weren't reading it as a question; they were reading it as a statement or as some sort of position you were taking, and felt they needed to attack or vilify your position in that space and take you down for some reason. It was very interesting. So, what's the name of your book, by the way? I want to
Deciphering the Gender Code.
Deciphering the Gender Code.
And I'm not sure about the next section yet. We're still working on that bit, but it's basically deciphering the gender code. So working out the context that we're currently in and how we got here, and then learning to write and execute your own unique code.
Yeah.
That understanding the context, but writing your own and executing it.
So, because I'm interested to explore a couple of parts of this. One is the topic, what is masculinity, femininity, and what's going on there. I think the second thing would be I'd love to chat about the Q&A itself and what went on there because it was interesting. And then the third is I'm keen to explore what I would call the online culture of instant judgment and moral outrage that usually we see in different ways, but it's definitely landed in your stream at the moment. So those three topics, where do you want to start?
We can start if the first one, if you like. Yeah.
So if we talk about the topic of femininity and masculinity and feminism and masculinism, I don't know if that's a thing. But so tell me, what do you think the state of play is today?
So what the state of play is I believe there's so many different camps on this, and I think you talked a little bit about this before, but our brain wants to put things in boxes. So and often, unfortunately, it's polar opposites of a continuum. So there's feminism, and then it seems like the opposing end is masculinity, and almost like there's nothing along the continuum that we can have, because if you've got one, I guess people who think in polarity like that have to have opposing parts. So I feel there's that element. So if masculinity and feminism as if you want to create positive masculinity, you've got to balance it with some so-called feminine traits. And I think that invites the vitriol and the reaction, because people feel that their feminism or their masculinity is under threat and they need to defend it and justify where they're at.
Yeah.
I think that's what's going on. But then I think what is actually needed is operating along the continuum, like not, acknowledging and paying attention to differences, physiologically, in terms of hormones, but in terms of brains, there's not pink brains and blue brains. We actually essentially have a similar structured brain, and as you would know, it's like our environment actually molds our brain from there. So what we're repeatedly exposed to and what we repeatedly do shapes our brain, like rather than something else. So understanding that, I think, opens up some possibilities to think along the points of the continuum and not at either ends. And that goes for everything that we do, in terms of everything. We talk a lot about balance, like yin and yang, which is important to have balance, but it's not always a polar place. There can be this space around the middle. and some people are referring to that now as like human rather than feminine, masculine, and needing all this rebalance, but operating, seeing people as human beings and recognizing their gender and how they identify as a gender, and seeing the human being, and that's where I'm hopeful that we're going to go, and I actually see that that's where we have to go based on where we're at right now in terms of technology and solving the massive challenges. We have to all work together and play to our strengths to take each other to that continuously higher level that we need to go. So I think we need to get past the boxing up, because when you put people in a box, you stick a label on it, you treat people according to the label, and then it just completely shuts down any opportunities for connection or anything bigger. So I think the more we can get out of the boxing up and sticking labels, the more opportunities there are.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, if one of the things that often strikes me is that you're right, the human brain is fantastic at categorization. It's important. We need to know the difference between an apple and an orange, or, we need to know the difference between different colored objects, different shaped objects. We need to be able to define different things in our world. It's critical. It's what our brain learns to do. It's one of the amazing things we do very early on. And the more categories we build, the better we're able to understand the world around us. And I think that the interesting thing around some of the commentary I see is that it's almost like this fight between the one dimension, I guess, is the male and female. The other dimension is binary. You have to be one or the other, versus completely non-binary. No one's anything. And I think, again, the extremes of those are really dangerous positions to try and drag everyone to. There's some natural, obvious differences between men and women that need to be acknowledged and recognised and celebrated. But there's also traits of people that are feminine or masculine, which are balanced and useful and valuable. And I think I get the sense that some people fear that feminism means that there's no place for men, or non-binary, or having any flexibility in gender means they don't fit in anymore. And it's a little bit like racial differences. You hear people say that, well, you're not really that ethnicity because you're only a half or an eighth or a quarter, and we're in this beautiful grey area in complexity in our world, and we need to learn to embrace that complexity. I think that's where it really lies.
Absolutely, and celebrate it, like you said. Like celebrate that complexity, because the more I think we can deal with complexity on a day-to-day basis, the more we can deal and thrive in a complex environment to take us to the next level of human evolution that we need to get to. And I don't see that's, for me, it's the only way forward. To understand and embrace and celebrate the complexity as a part of every day, not as something we've just got to get through.
I think that's right. And I think it's, if we move on to the second topic around Q&A and the panel and what they're talking about and the different commentary that was coming through there was something that the CEO of IAG, Peter Harmer, had said a few times to different people, and he did mention it to me, around gender in the workplace. And I'd be interested to see or hear your thoughts on this. His view was, for a long time, the pendulum had swung in one direction and had been stuck there in favour of males. And I think that's a pretty objective sort of reality of work and the last 50 years, 100 years. He said, to get it to balance, we might swing the pendulum a little bit further than the middle for a little while, but that's okay. We might have to get past the middle and then come back a little bit. And that's how I read some of those comments in the Q&A panel, which seemed quite aggressive, quite harsh, and could be interpreted that way, is that sure, in this sort of space, there will be people who will feel the need to go a lot further than the middle, and maybe that's okay in this sort of space. I'm keen to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely, so true. It in order to reach equality, we've got to build in equity into the system, and it needs to be forced. I think but things like quotas, I never believed in those because I believed in merit. But after all this research I've been doing, we need quotas. We need ways to force through this change. It needs to be bigger. In terms of violence, it's not something I would engage in personally, and I wouldn't like my children to. If you use violence, like in terms of what you were saying, if you use violence as kind of a metaphor for that push, to get that pendulum to the other end, I'm not condone violence at all, but there needs to be some big pushes, and the Me Too movement since it has been incredible, because I started my research before Me Too, just before, and I've noticed a huge difference in the conversations, what people are prepared to say, how much more honest people are prepared to be around conversations, how much more they're giving themselves to permission to address it and not just shove it down as if it's something that someone else can sort out. People are really taking a stand, and that's confronting in a system that is designed for the benefit of the male way of operating. So, you look at childhood behaviour, and you look at the way young boys play. There's a winner, there's a loser, there's a hierarchy. If you're in the middle, you lose 50-50. But you deal with the loss and move on to the next win. You pick the guy in your team, person in your team, who's going to get you to win, not who's good with social skills or they're your buddy. And then, so this behaviour keeps being reinforced. You take that into the workplace. We've got org charts. We've got you look at your typical accounting, partnership firm. There's a total. You've got a few partners at the top, but it's a massive pyramid. You look at the way girls operate, and most of the games are relational and process. So, this isn't all girls, but I'm being completely generalising here. But dolls, beads, even dancing, drawing, all that, they're process and relational, and competition could be a potential relationship breakdown. So it's not, you don't tend to do that. So you take that into the workplace, and with that kind of training around, play behaviour and all the way through, that's how, women with that training tend to operate in that way, process and relational. So it's challenge. So they've been trained for a different kind of environment. Men and boys have been trained, if they follow that path from childhood and babies, to operate in this patriarchal system, this kind of hierarchical system. So, there's two parts to it. Women, yes, it's great, to train them and learn the rules of the game in this, system. But they're always going to be behind because they haven't had as much training, and they're still operating the system that's designed for them to favour the male way of operating. So that's what it's that underlying. Why is this so hard for me? And for women? Why do I feel like I've got to work harder? What is it? It's something that I can't quite put my finger on. And you can have all sorts of training to kind of fix women and give them extra support. But until you really address that corporate code, that relationship code, that gender code, what is really going on here, and understanding the context that you're in and what's been set up for you, then it's really hard to progress. Like, feel like you're doing enough and being enough and doing a good job, because it goes completely against your way of operating. So yeah, I think we need some strong pushes.
Yeah,
for sure.
I think there's some really interesting points in there. I totally agree with you on the way in which we're brought up to play our roles in society, and you see this in the slow change in India, for example, of the caste system, and many would say hasn't changed very much at all. People and there's a whole bunch of economic and other challenges going on there. There's the social structures the humans set up are incredibly complex, and that's what we're trying to change. And I think that's where that notion of, well, actually, it's not just, we don't just need to get paid the same. Actually, there's a whole bunch of things we need to change in the way the way the rules of the game are actually set up. I love this conversation around hierarchies, because there's lots of trains of thought there, and I don't agree with everything that he says, but Jordan Peterson's got a really interesting view on hierarchies. He said, look, if there's anything that people need to do, some people will be better than others at doing that task. Therefore, there'll be a hierarchy, and humans fall into those hierarchies really well. Whether it's we need someone who's strong, therefore we can line people up on strength, or we need someone who's smart, or if I'm going to get my accounting done, I want the person who did best at accounting, not the person who did worst at accounting, and therefore I'll hire them, they'll get paid more. And so your hierarchies are a really interesting thing. Like, getting rid of hierarchies is actually missing the point of the game. I think part of what we need to do around gender is how do we change the structures so that it's actually a meritocracy, and not a meritocracy where males have trump cards, for one of the bad term use.
No, but that's so true. And this is, I try to speak about this with the most, in the most judgment-free manner. It's all okay. This is the context that we're in, and this is the lens that we're looking through, and it's all okay. It's no one's fault. It's not personal. It's structural. It just like you mentioned there. Taking a different view though, with the hierarchy, that implies there's a value system that's that other things are valued more highly, so they're higher on the pecking order. But if we looked at what everybody contributes collectively as equal, like that their contribution matters, then maybe we could go from hierarchy to collective. So instead of pyramids, we go to spheres and circles.
Yeah.
So understanding that working within a circle, that everyone is operating collaboratively and collectively, and that their contribution matters to the survival of that group for different reasons, and translate that out to an organisation. It's the same. So you have to have people who are making ultimate decisions, but you can have a leadership structure where it's like, okay, this is the business case, I'm going to make the final call, but what are your thoughts? Frame it up front.
I worked yesterday with a large international insurance company, and the Australian division of that company are constantly frustrated that any big deals they write need to be sent over to Europe to be signed off by all of these different people, and the time that it takes, and it slows their agility down. And it is, when I talk to people about how do we make organizations work faster, there's two big spheres that I talk about here, and one of them is, do we actually really understand each other? And I think this is your point, which is, do we actually understand the contribution other people make? There's that old the old story, JFK at NASA goes up to the janitor, shakes his hand and says, "What do you do here?" And the janitor says, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." You know,
Mm, mm,
and you only have to live in or be in an office for a couple of weeks where the cleaners don't turn up, and you know how dysfunctional the environment can become. Those people are just as critical. But you make a really great point there. We don't always understand the contribution different people have, and we bias towards hierarchy. I think the second thing we need is trust. The thing
absolutely.
that concerned me most about the conversation on LinkedIn and through that, I'll call them commentary, through the comments that people were throwing through, there seemed to be this real sense of judgment, and people saying their commentary was vile, it's aggressive, and they were condoning violence, and I'm not sure it was. I'm not sure it was received in the spirit with which it was intended, and I don't condone violence, nor do I think. I do think some of those comments probably went too far in that direction. But this idea that we're not starting with a basis of actually trusting each other enough to have conversations, that's what really concerns me.
Absolutely. And I feel with those kind of responses as well, and there's a real lack of mirror holding, really. So I guess in one of the comments I said, I was trying to highlight, I was just trying to reflect back what his comment was. I said, this is obviously a really important issue for you that you feel strongly about, blah, blah, blah. And he said, no, but the whole language that he was using screamed emotion. But he said, no, it's just an observation. I said, I assumed incorrectly that you're given the emotive language, blah, blah, blah. And he said, don't assume, blah, blah. But I think this is so disconnected from how to express yourself in a way that is meaningful to others, and you're the empathy guy and perspective. So that real lack of empathy and perspective for how your words are landing. So it's like, am I going to say what I want to say, or am I going to say something that other people want to hear and can make sense of, and we can have a conversation? So am I venting, or am I conversing, or even commenting? So, and the very interesting thing is, I've had warm-ups with this, with my brother. He lives in the States. He's a C-suite person, and around gender and gender code and what I'm working on. So I've had some warm-up with this. So it wasn't a complete surprise. But it feels like it's because it's this potentially this change that's happening, that they're not, potentially not really, they don't know what it is, but they know there's something happening, and it feels like there's things being taken away from them. And so, and maybe they don't feel heard and acknowledged in other realms of their life. And they're using this post as a vehicle to express themselves, and they don't realise, how that's landing, because they don't have that empathy and that perspective to understand how another person's receiving it.
I found it hilarious that there's that person, and I don't want to, get into individuals too much, but that particular person was so quick to say, you should never assume, and you don't know what I'm feeling, and you don't know what's going on for me, but was absolutely adamant that he knew the exact intent, and that all the things that were said, he understood as objectively and factually from the show, and from what you'd written, and from what anyone else had written. And it goes back to this idea that there's lots of grey in here. There's lots of uncertainty, and it's not black and white. And most of the things that we find so. I spent that 45 minutes in a float tank, which was quite cool. And one of the things that came up in my thinking was this idea around hate speech and freedom of speech. And this is tricky. And I think this is one of the because we've have the social media and so much opportunity to communicate so broadly now. It's like everyone's got the biggest microphone, the megaphone in the world, and they can all yell to everyone. This space between, okay, people said that, but that's freedom of speech versus people said this, and I think that's hate speech, and then somewhere in between, it's fuzzy. And how do we navigate that? And I've got some thoughts, but I'm keen to hear yours on this.
That's a really great one. Because that's all interpretation, like which end of the spectrum, where do you sit with that? It's all, and I think where there's some, hate speech is where there's a deliberate intention to denigrate, to, where you're using strong language, where it's pretty clear. And yes, there's free speech, but then there's also venting and all sorts of other, and downloading on others. And I think you can have free speech, but I think possibly if you are really interested in having a conversation rather than venting or downloading, you ask permission. So is it okay if if we unload this, or can we have a private message about this? Like, staying in a group situation screams, I want, look at me, so I want to influence people or affect them. So free speeching. So for me, it's all about the intention. So what's your intention? And I came back, every single comment I made, I came back to the intention. So what's the intention of what my original post was, how this person, I assume, is feeling and thinking, and what I want to get out of it. So I think taking a breath, and I didn't respond straight away to anything. I took some time. I distanced myself from how I felt, and noticed my thinking and my thoughts, and stepped back. And I think that's one of the really important things to understand about social media, how powerful it is in so many ways. And I compare it to, in the old days where you'd write a letter to the editor of the newspaper.
Yeah.
So something, Mr. Brown complaining about some noise or something, or what, I don't want to trivialize people's experiences, but whatever it is. And so Mr. Brown would go, all right, it's happening again. He'd go and sit down, or she, and write the letter by hand, so, brain to hand, and then maybe take it or type it or whatever, read it again, maybe get someone to look at it, I don't know, put it in a letter box, in an envelope, stick it in the mail, and then it'll go to the editing team.
Pay their 30 cents for a stamp.
Pay their 30. So there's commitment there. It's a financial investment, a time investment, and then you go to the editor, or the person, maybe even the copy girl or boy who are opening it, and then it might go to the next level, and and then it may get in the paper or not. But even if it wasn't selected to get into the paper, he or she had that time to step back and think, write it down. There's a lot of points of pause in that process.
Yeah.
Whereas now we can get on a device and react. So are we responding or reacting? Yeah. So I feel, there's always going to be things that we feel strongly about, and that's totally okay. But maybe taking a few breaths and thinking, is this really important enough to do this? Am I ranting or downloading, or do I want to understand this more? Yeah. So I feel like there's a lot of steps, or there's a lot of things to think about.
It's a bit like the difference between the musket and the automatic machine gun, semi-automatic machine gun, right? Exactly. The olden day, the argument in the US for gun laws is, we always needed them. Yeah, but they used to be muskets. You couldn't go and kill 55 people because you had to reload the thing. And I think social media is not dissimilar. The thought process I had around this was interesting for me anyway, and you can tell me if it is or isn't. But I think what we should be worried about and concerned about, and the thing that hurts us is hateful actions, behaviours, when people actually do things to other people filled with hate. And I think what's happening is a lot of people think, well, hateful speech turns into hateful actions.
Such a good point. Yeah.
And so what I thought about this is, well, maybe that's true, maybe it's not. Because if we think about this differently, instead of those two things being in a line, actually, if we put them beside each other, where do these both come from? Well, they both come from hateful ideas, hateful thoughts in our brains. And maybe actually the hate speech is like the canary in the coal mine. It's a safe way of knowing that something's going on. Because my concern is whether it's extreme left, extreme right, extreme up and down, whatever, right? It sort of is irrelevant to me. But in some ways, if we think that the behaviour is going to stop because we quieten the voice, we're actually not getting rid of the bad ideas. We're not addressing the hateful ideas people are having, the thought processes. We're not educating people to think differently about the world. We're just saying you're just not allowed to say these things. It doesn't thinking those things. Now, there's a good argument to say, well, the speech propagates these ideas and more people can pick them up, and then we hear, well, disenfranchised young people get in this sort of space, da-da-da. I'd still go back to our problem is that we've got a whole bunch of disenfranchised young people who we're not educating with good ideas, with good social norms, and we're not feeding them the things that they need. Because I think if we could give them those sorts of things, the percentage of people who would keep listening to these hateful ideas would drop dramatically. So I'm a bit worried. I mean, partly I think we've got to look at freedom of speech and say, if that's valuable, okay, we're going to have to deal with some hate speech, but we've got to see it as a warning sign that action needs to happen and we need to help some people, not as a threat that needs to be silenced, because I don't think it goes away.
Absolutely. No, it just goes dark, like you said. So either dark web or dark, other ways, or inside, and that's never good. And interestingly, I actually did do a little bit of research on trolls, because working, I knew that I would face adverse reactions at some stage. So I looked at women in particular who have been trolled really, really awfully, extreme stuff. And one woman, can't remember her name now, she wrote a book on it. She was trolled herself. And she actually went and interviewed these people who, that's basically what they do. And they operate in groups. There's like networks of them. And look, there's various different things. She, look at psychopathic behaviour and all the rest of it. But there's so much from her research. But I just thought of it when you said your point there about disenfranchised people. A good number of these guys are men, young men. Their experience had been that they'd kind of been forgotten about as younger kids, pre-teens and teenagers, and being, allowed to just, stay in a room and
1 moment.
Oh.
Okay.
There is
Jerry. And being allowed to sit in their rooms or spaces with devices and basically not have any interaction, role modelling, attention and effort, like nurturing. And they turned online for all of that, all of what they needed to develop into an adult. And that was part of the formula of a recurring theme. So it's engaging with people in communities and having good role models and environments where they're not going down that route, where they feel angry at the world, where they feel not listened to, not heard, and the only people that are listening to them and hearing them are these group of people with these ideas to cause pain and suffering.
Yeah.
You know, so I guess, you know, there's so many ways. It's a huge thing, and there's so many ways to come at it. And I think a lot of the time with what I try to do is before it gets to emergency department stuff. So investing in processes, in practices, in conversations. When, you know, probably more kids. I mean, it's because I've got 3 kids of my own, but emerging leaders, people who are facing these challenges, to help them, to guide them, to know that they don't have to go down that route. You know, that they, you know, their contribution is valuable. You know,
and that point you made earlier, the ability to pause, to not feel like you have to react. That, you know, if someone says something you disagree with, that wasn't necessarily a personal attack, and actually it might be a really interesting thing to think through. And I think this is where, again, thinking about you know, the calls from people on your post to say, well, that Q&A should be cancelled, those people should never be allowed to have a voice ever again, it's vile. Those people were saying things that I hadn't thought of before, in ways that I hadn't heard before. I didn't necessarily agree with what they were saying, but largely that's not the point. The point is, am I willing to sit with curiosity and openness and consider it? Then I can pass, you know, my own judgments through that process, or do I say, because you're saying things I don't agree with, I don't think you should be able to speak? Because that sort of exclusion is what got us to, you know, to have white male domination across the entire globe, and I'm sure we all agree that that's one of the things that needs to be changed. My question is, how do we have these conversations when the response is, you know, the one you experienced, for example?
I honestly, I reached out to the one particular guy who was prolific, and I honestly said, I was genuine. I wanted to connect with him and actually talk to him on the phone or on a Zoom call or something, because I think the path to that is to really hear someone's story. So, and I know that's not possible all the time, but maybe it is groups or something, but I'm sure he's someone's brother, just like my brother. He's someone's dad, uncle. He's a human being. And I wanted to pay him that respect. And I genuinely wanted to know how he got to where he is and what he's going through. I don't want to know his family history, but I just want to understand more about where you're at and how you got here. And why you want to keep drawing me into the whole entire program. And that's, so I actually think it's a one by one, it's listening to other people's stories. I think it's understanding that we're all in this together, and that maybe sound a little bit Pollyanna-ish, but honestly, with the research that I've interviewing women leaders who lead parents and others, I certainly had some judgmental beliefs about certain people in certain roles. I'll own that, but listening to them, opposite them, listening to their story as humans, you can't have it. Empathy just flows from that. It just, connecting as a human, asking honest questions, having that initial connection as a human being, and trying to understand what's going on through their eyes. So, and then the other trick to that is taking yourself completely out of it. I don't mean who you are, but any kind of sensitivity around your heart and emotions. And not to say you don't matter, but just distancing what they're saying from you. So not comparing, not contrasting, not competing, but listening to their words to see a human being. And like I hear that over and over with, you look at that series, Go Back to Where You Came From. That's an extreme version, but getting people together on opposite sides and having someone, moderate with best interest at heart. So maybe not sometimes a Q&A panel. Well, maybe not Fran, but Tony. I don't, he may be different. But so having someone who's genuinely interested in unearthing people's stories together, and that's actually one of my passion projects, is to get people to a think tank where you've got people not just opposing each other, but willing to come together and talk, to get some understanding.
Yeah, I sort of think of it. I think of it. The analogy I often use is balloons and statues. You get these people who are balloons, and they just float from person to person, idea to idea, and they just sort of hitch on to the next cool fad. And those people are very good at taking up cults and finding new celebrities to like every 2 weeks. The opposite is the statue who says, "I am what I believe. What I believe. Nothing changes. Nothing ever moves." And we need to know that neither of these ends of the spectrum is very good. We've got to be able to walk with our feet on the ground and have a sense of who we are and our values. But then we also need to know that when we explore with big open eyes, and we explore without what I would call conscious curiosity. This idea that I have views on this, but right now to explore effectively, I need to park them. I need to be open.
Yeah, that's it. And it's not about me. I think it's just so important to see. I kind of talk about inspiring rather than desiring. So listen to someone for inspiration rather than desiring what they have, or the best bits of what they have or do to build your own model and unique code. Building your own unique code based on, and I don't think you can do that without that openness, like sort of befriending your ego, not completely losing it, but befriending your ego to open up to other people.
Yeah.
It's a work in progress. It takes a skill. It's a skill.
Absolutely. Otherwise, what we do is we look at situations and we find ways to validate our current beliefs. And I was talking yesterday to a group, the same group, and I said, look, no matter what you believe, you can find information on the internet that will suggest to you that you're right.
Yeah,
that doesn't mean it's helpful to you. It doesn't mean it's serving you, but you'll feel good about it, right? Every time you find something that validates your belief, particularly if you're in competition, if you find something that validates your position, and this is part of where trolls get dangerous, right? Because when I say something and someone else backs me up, my brain gets this release and says, you're right. See? Right. Aha, we're right, they're wrong. And this is, 100 years ago, there were, people who had strange and crazy ideas, and let's call him Donald. Donald lived in our village, and he had crazy ideas, and every now and then he'd walk down the streets with no pants on, yelling crazy stuff. But in our village, we all knew, well, that's just Donald. He does that sometimes. Just ignore what he's saying. Someone go and give him a blanket and a cup of tea. Like, let's look after him.
Yes.
The difference is today, Donald goes behind his keyboard, he types something out, and he connects with Donalds all over the world. No one looks to support him, and he feels like he's part of this massive movement. And
so true.
It's a totally different social dynamic, because when you see that comment, you don't know, oh, that's Donald. You don't know. You don't understand what's really going on, and you can't. It's much harder for you to really support that person. So we end up taking sides, and we get into these pretty ugly discussions on social media, I think.
And that's it. It's so interesting. I think people tend to be okay jumping into their ideological bunkers, as if that people talk about identity politics, but it's as if that behavior or that thought sums up that other person completely, and they don't see all the other parts. I know I'm even talking about people that you love and know, and in relationships with, they can leap to conclusions, but I increasingly now see with that distance that's because they're not secure in themselves and they don't feel complete and whole. So I'm able to extend compassion, in that situation, because it's not really about me. It's about the fact that they don't feel secure. And, you know, I've been through it myself and friends more recently. And when it's someone else happening to someone else, you see it more starkly. But around gossip, how people can be so readily open to believing salacious gossip. If they haven't got the information, if there's a gap in the information, there's no explanation, they jump onto the story. And the bigger and the better, the more salacious the story, the more likely they're to believe it, even though they know the person and that they don't kind of question all of who they are.
Mm.
But if there's something about that person or some sort of personal insecurity, around a marriage breakup, for instance, then they're okay to jump on board as a group and believe that, because it's a good story, and completely taking the human out of it. It's mind blowing, and then it's just ramped up online.
That's right. And then someone else who knows very little about the situation feels good because they jump in as well, and then suddenly we've got people ganging up on each other. It's I think the main problem I have is it doesn't help us get to a better place as a society. It's almost like tribalism, and it's damaging because I think in that state we forget that there's a complex world out there.
Absolutely.
It wasn't that long ago. We all lived in small little homogenous groups where we couldn't contact other people. It wasn't that long.
Absolutely. And I think I love that point about Donald, because I feel that's actually the way forward, is reconnecting back into community a lot more. So, understanding that what, we might say now, I found my tribe. Well, I question sometimes it's great to have a tribe, but maybe it's actually more of a gang, because it can be like groupthink. So actually a tribe or a village or a community, you have diverse people in diverse roles. I don't mean necessarily cultural diversity, but you have the Donalds, you have the person who's always going to come around to your house and help you, no matter what happens, they're always going to be there. The person who, all those diverse people in a village, and you learn so much from them. And then if your village has your back, then you don't have to defend and blame and shame to survive. You have a fallback. You've got your village, you've got your community, and just that sense of belonging there. But I think a lot of people can feel disconnected because they don't have that community feeling, and that we don't have the rituals that we used to have. Even like Sunday church or whatever you think about that, it was a collective experience.
Community coming together. I mean, I'm not an overly religious person, but what you do see in most religious practices is a foundation of community and a sense of community. I've felt similar experiences being in sporting clubs and teams, in certain communities of work I've done in companies. And one of the things working in a consulting role is often you sort of drop in and out, and you really do notice that difference. I was listening to a podcast with Penn Jillette from Penn and Teller, the magician.
Oh, yeah.
And he was talking about this. He said he now regrets being, the example he used was he was anti the Eagles, for example, the band. And he said, I picked these weird teams. He said, now I'm either in a team of one or a team of 7 billion.
Wow.
We're looking after myself, or we're all in this together. And I think it's really, it's an interesting place to start to think about. Well, how do we support the Donalds? How do we reconnect with them? How do we learn from each other? And how do we have these conversations without them, how do we skill each other up so that we have conversations without them spiraling into name throwing, trolling, and the like?
Yeah, I think it will take a bit of training, and using coach speak, like asking permission and things like that. But I feel really, it starts with the individual, like doing the work on themselves. So I find with the type of people who commented is a lot of the time they'll go to data. So they'll defer to data and evidence, and they see that as truth. So the data and evidence is truth and numbers. And because they're so data driven, they don't understand that there's perception, there's feelings, there's philosophies around it, but that they're being driven by. But they feel that numbers don't lie, evidence don't lie. But when you look at what they write, it stands out that there's a lot of emotion around everything they're saying. So until they realise that they're using data to express themselves, these fears or whatever, I don't know if they can have an honest conversation.
Absolutely. And this is a lot of the work that I find myself doing in the empathy space is first getting people to understand how their brain actually works. And, we know emotions first. We feel emotions first, not later. We know that we can interpret things through our senses, even if we don't consciously interpret them. So there's been experiments where they've shown people who've had damage to their visual cortex, they've shown them images and their brain lights up in certain places, even though their visual cortex isn't working. And what happens is that the image is actually going from their eyes, first through their amygdala and in that region, and therefore sparking an emotive reaction first before it is the visual cortex for processing. So there was experiments where...
No way.
Yeah, absolutely. So people who couldn't see, they were blind because their visual cortex doesn't work, show them an image of someone smiling, and first of all, they would smile, but then using MRIs, they could see their brains lighting up. Because part of, and we don't think about this, what we tend to do is we then post-rationalize why we did that. So they would ask them, why did you smile? And they couldn't say because they just saw someone smiling. What they could say was, I just felt a bit happy at that stage. Or, and maybe it was because of this idea I had or this thought I had. So the way our brains work, and again, as you said, really, really good point. I might well be bedded in my philosophy or my ideology for deeply emotive and subconscious reasons. But when pushed, I'll validate facts and then use those facts to ensure myself and you that it wasn't just emotive. But what we know is that, your brain, I think the stat is we take in 11 million bits of data go into our brain from our body, from our senses and our body every second. And every second, your conscious brain processes 40 of them. 40 out of the 11 million.
Oh my God, that's nuts, isn't it?
There's heaps of stuff going on that you don't know about, you don't consciously know about. And a lot of that is that starting point for if you really want to understand people, well, you've got to be consciously curious, which means you actually get how your brain works and how to turn that stuff off or deal with it more effectively. And it's hard to do, but important.
I love that because that is a fantastic way in. There's no talking about kind of feelings and whatever that could be from the point of view that there's soft things. It's like, this is your brain. It's hardware, and like it's a part of your body. This is how you act. This is what science tells us. People have defer to science.
Emotions are what goes through. thousands, millions of years of evolution, right? When we tasted something and it was sweet and delicious, we had to remember that because that sweet, delicious thing was probably going to keep us alive at some point. When we saw something that was terrifying and scary and was going to eat us, we had to remember where that was because we needed to not go there because we would get eaten by stuff. So the emotion was like the highlighters to remember, the important stuff. We haven't turned that off just because we've got computers and spreadsheets.
That's right. So it's actually, it's kind of like honouring the important role that your emotions play in the process, rather than maybe saying that you're emotion driven. So, and I think that's where that's traditionally seen. The emotion driven by emotion is traditionally seen as a female way of operating, and this part, and it's being not seen as something effective and incredibly useful in breadwinning. So I think the continuation of that is not, so it's all tarred with that same brush, but understanding how emotions are at play and how important they are, side by side, or the importance of it, but not being driven, not coming from emotion. That's weird.
Yeah. I mean, the term I like is having greater emotional granularity. And I think this is what maybe women sometimes do much better than men. Now, because I would argue that things like domestic violence are more emotionally driven than they are rationally driven. Addictions are often more emotionally driven than they are rationally driven. And I don't think there's a bias that women are more the perpetrators of domestic violence nor addicts. So I would suggest that we are all emotionally driven. What the skill I think we need more of is having greater emotional granularity and then emotional control. So first of all, I'm feeling something, and little kids have this, right, where it hurts and they just cry. Now, it's not necessarily what an adult would call pain. It might be what we'd call discomfort, but their level of emotional granularity at that age is very small. Everything that ranges from extreme pain to a bit of discomfort is cry. That's my reaction. The difference between anger and frustration, if I don't have a good distinction, if you think of that as just being a chemical reaction that's happening in my brain, and I can't differentiate between I'm frustrated by this, I'm angry by this, and I just react as if I'm angry, well, it's easier to see where that might play out down a pathway. So I think what we need to do is first of all build greater emotional granularity through these sorts of conversations, and then it's as you mentioned earlier, which I love, this respond not react. My dear friend Patria King talks about that a lot. You're feeling depressed, you're not depressed, and how you respond to that feeling is up to you. You're in control of that. It doesn't feel like that, and I'm not belittling people who or suggesting that depression is something you can turn on and off, but you're feeling sad. You're not sad. You as a person are feeling it at the moment. That's an emotion. Now you need to be able to wrestle back some control from that.
Absolutely, and that's the Buddhist detachment thing. So creating that distance between your thoughts and feelings and who you are. As if your thoughts and feelings are a thing, like in the universe, and but it's getting kind of deep, but consciousness, that consciousness behind that, and creating a further and further distance by just asking questions. Oh, I notice I'm feeling sad. I notice that I'm thinking that I'm sad, and I notice that it's not part of who I am, but I'm feeling sad at the moment, and it'll pass. So keeping on step, creating that distance from those feelings and thoughts, knowing that you're not attached to them, that they're going to pass. It's like psychological weather. You're going through a thought storm, and it's going to pass. on the other side of the storm is going to be calm, and there'll be possibly some inspired thinking on the other side. But I guess it's, practically as well, if you feed those feelings and emotions and thoughts, then they're going to grow.
Yeah.
But if you don't feed them, and you don't have to feed anything else, but just create that distance between them, then they're not going to get fed.
And looping that back, that's where if I have those feelings and then I search online for someone else to validate those feelings for me and make me feel justified in having those, and then I make it my ideology that I take a stand on this particular issue, and it's my sense of moral outrage. I was accused of being having a white male, a white savior complex, and being racist and all sorts of things by a group.
Wow.
Yeah, which was new and interesting for me. But on reflection, it was a similar sort of process of them hearing certain things, making quick judgments of what those things meant in terms of my intent and my underlying personality. I talked a little bit, it was only a short piece about some of the charity work I do over in Thailand that I've been doing for 10, almost 11 years now. And
wow. Yeah.
And they accused me of taking advantage of my volunteerism. And again, this is the problem when we make judgments on sound bites and look to have this sense of moral outrage as quickly as we can. It can affect us pretty quickly.
I know, and you sort of think, how does the people who are saying that, how does it affect their present moment and their reality right now? What you do? How really does that influence anything about them or their day?
Well,
really?
Totally. And look, my whole message was this idea of conscious curiosity. How do you suspend that? You do have thoughts and feelings, I get that, but how do you practice the art of suspending that so that you can openly explore and then take that time, that pause to reflect and go, okay, based on everything I've heard, now what's my new view on this situation?
That's it.
But it happens on the extreme lefts, extreme rights. It happens everywhere. It happens unfortunately in homes all over Australia at the moment, and on your LinkedIn, as it turns out, happens there.
And I guess in the moment, I didn't have this much clarity in the moment. It's a shock. So I think I started off with mentally, they're just thoughts. I mean, they're just words. They're just words on a page. They're just someone's words, someone's thoughts on a page. Mentally. So just you start with that mental until you can get it to heart level. But it's a start. You know what I mean? Yep. Just words are just words. They're just words. So I'm not going to say it wasn't hard, but I didn't have this clarity then. But you need to have some steps in place, I think. Yeah.
Hey, look, I really loved having a chat with you. That was awesome, and I really look forward to reading your book. When's it due? April
next year. So I'm still working. I've got the cover, but April next year. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, well, I look forward to grabbing a copy. Thanks so much for the conversation this afternoon. You have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Danielle.
All right, see you later. Bye.
Yeah.